Subcommittee will come to order. I ask unanimous consent that the chair be authorized to declare a recess at any time. Without objection, so ordered. The hearing will now come to order. I ask unanimous consent that the chair be authorized to declare a recess at any time, and again, without objection, so ordered. I want to welcome everyone to this hearing of the Military Personnel Subcommittee. Today's hearing is on meritocracy in the military services, from recruiting and accession to promotion and command selection. I want to thank our witnesses for being with us today. I hope this hearing provides an opportunity for our members to have a productive exchange with our witnesses and provide answers to their questions. The questions we ask today may be focused on the military's personnel system. However, they have much broader implications. These questions go to our nation's founding principles: meritocracy, talent, and equality of opportunity. Across the country, these principles are under attack. They have been sacrificed at the altar of diversity, equity, and inclusion bureaucracies. Bureaucracies which demand racial and gender quotas regardless of ability. These performative social justice goals require government agencies, large corporations, top-tier universities, and the military to trade skill, productivity, hard work, and ingenuity for a workforce which looks good on a brochure. This is demeaning for all Americans, including those singled out by those quotas. Millions of Americans are frustrated with the social justice agenda that pervades our schools, corporations, and now the Pentagon bureaucracy. For example, on August 9th, 2022, a memo from the Secretary of the Air Force explicitly laid out quota goals for its officer applicant pool. Apparently, Air Force officer applicants should be 15% Hispanic, 10% Asian, 67% white, 36% female, and so on. Americans are fed up with that. There is one place we simply can't afford to trade equal opportunity for radical ideology, and that's the United States military. We must do whatever it takes to ensure that effort, hard work, and results are the only relevant measure of our service members, not only because every American deserves to be judged by their character, but because no matter what our military does in peacetime, lethality is the only standard that will matter on the battlefield. If these policies continue, we are placing military readiness and our national security at risk, and we are putting an end to one of the last great meritocratic systems in the United States. Today, you will hear from two panels. The first panel is a group of experts that will explain the cost of military readiness associated with trading merit for diversity quotas. In the second panel, we will hear from DoD's military personnel chiefs. They will describe the factors and characteristics used to select military members for promotion and command. Additionally, they will address demographically targeted recruiting and accessions. Before hearing from our witnesses, let me offer Ranking Member Kim an opportunity to make opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for coming forward. And I just want to start by taking a step back here and just say, I believe all of us in this room want the same thing. We want the strongest possible military to defend our nation, and that goal requires the best leaders to step up and lead this military. And in pursuit of this absolute need, we need a process of accession, retention, and promotion that is fair and transparent and based on skill and merit. All of us want and demand a meritocratic system. But let's keep in mind that meritocratic means weighing both quantitative and qualitative qualities. There is no solely quantitative way to identify the best leaders. Academic achievement and tactical proficiency are easy to measure. You either have a degree or you don't. You're either a marksman or an expert with your assigned rifle. But assessing and defining factors such as leadership, character, and integrity cannot be perfectly reduced to a number. I'm interested in hearing from our witnesses how they assess those hard-to-measure attributes across the spectrum of service, how we recruit, how we retain, how we decide to promote our service members. I also hope to hear our witnesses' insights on what improvements we need to make so our processes work as intended. And I hope Congress and the Department of Defense make every effort to encourage service from people of all types of backgrounds as we engage in this process. We should work together to foster a culture that encourages and rewards excellence, creativity, innovation, and critical thinking so our military can continue to meet emerging challenges around the globe. As I close, I also just want to say that our desire for the promotion of the best military leaders should also encompass the need for Congress to fulfill its own role in this process. And holding up military promotions is not the right way to make a political point. I hope all of us in this room can agree that our national security is vital and the threats we face are real. We need fully qualified leaders in their jobs doing the work to secure our nation. We ask a lot of our service members. Now we need to make sure that they know we are supporting them and their mission. Thank you to the witnesses again for being here, and I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the ranking member. Each witness will have the opportunity to present his testimony, and each member will have an opportunity to question the witnesses for 5 minutes. We respectfully ask the witnesses to summarize their testimony in 2 minutes or less. Your written comments and statements will be made part of the hearing record. With that, Mr. Tebow, you may make your opening statement.
Chairman Banks, Ranking Member Kim, and the members of this subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify this afternoon. The military must only consider factors of policy that better the armed forces' ability to fight and win our nation's wars. Merit, or that which alludes to military professionalism and competence, must not be the first consideration, but the exclusive lens through which these leaders make decisions. Race and gender diversity exists supposedly as something that the military must embrace and promote as if the armed forces marched to the beat of a corporate or a university drum. In reality, the existence of a professional, permanent military in a democratic liberal society demands that the institution must exist apart from the ideologies and politics prevalent in modern-day America. The military must balance functional considerations, or those capabilities required to fight and win our nation's wars, with social considerations, or those ideologies which define American life outside the military. This means that the military must maintain such a strict separation between values not specifically related to the military profession and those other values that are more prevalent. A formal consideration of innate characteristics like race and gender is toxic for military units because it redefines the concept of standards. Standards are no longer how the military selects and promotes the very best, but they are the minimum floor of expectation before other considerations can be evaluated. This is a subtle but fundamental change. When we assume that the military must reflect the demographics of the nation, we presume proportionalism into the experiences of everyday soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. Military leaders and the institutions they lead embed the imperative of racial representation into the lives of American service members, which is never guaranteed. The integrity of our republic is in tension with a military that evaluates matters of politics and identity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tebow. Now, Mr. Greenway, you may make your opening statement. Let's turn on your microphone.
Thank you, Chairman Banks, Ranking Member Kim, distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss issues vital to the defense of our nation. As a veteran, the ability of our armed forces to protect, defend us, and those committed to serving in them is of personal significance. Like many of you, I see the unrelenting commitment to competence, which has long established our military as the finest in the world, as ever known, being degraded by pernicious ideologies which would replace merit and demonstrated ability in our accessions and promotion systems. The result is a less capable and ready force struggling to regain the trust of the public it serves and increasingly challenged to face the full range of threats that confront us. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, critical race theory, and related ideologies are eroding the effectiveness of our military by discarding that meritocracy and ensures our armed forces are led by the most qualified. Our military has encountered at least 3 periods of personal turbulence and crisis since the adoption of the all-volunteer force in 1973. The first was in '78 following the withdrawal from Vietnam, the second in '94 at the withdrawal from Somalia. We're currently experiencing the third after the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan and the worst recruiting crisis we have ever faced. The present crisis bears hallmarks to those which preceded it. All 3 reflect challenges in recruiting environments and a lack of focus on what matters, competence, and effectiveness. and to focus on distractions like the adoption of corporate practices or the replacement of merit with various other criteria. In all three cases, the cause was clear, the recovery took years, but it involved significant congressional oversight. Ultimately, the primacy of competence was restored and the force recovered. War is an unforgiving enterprise. As a combat veteran with multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, I can attest to it. Without question, the only proven criteria for promotion in the armed forces are character and competence as reflected by demonstrated performance. Recognizing the brutal reality of combat in which they're tested, this approach ensures the highest quality personnel enter and ultimately lead the force. We don't maintain a military to participate in war, but to prevail. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today and look forward to your questions.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Levine, you may make your opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Banks, Ranking Member Kim, members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me here this afternoon. Even more than technology, our greatest military advantage over our competitors is our people. The capability of our total force, officer and enlisted, active duty and reserve, military and civilian, organic and contractor, is multiplied many times over by the exceptional quality of our recruits and the unparalleled levels of their training and education. I'd like to make 3 quick points today. First, diversity strengthens our military, and military leadership is most effective when it appropriately reflects the force. Only by recruiting in every region of the country and every demographic group can the Department access the personnel and talent that it needs. A force that did not reflect the diversity of America would not only be smaller, it would be significantly less capable. Second, the military promotion system is merit-based, but that does not mean that it can necessarily be as objective as we would like. Federal law requires merit-based promotion decisions, providing the selection boards convened by military departments recommend those officers whom they determine to be best qualified for promotion. Board members and service members involved in the selection process have described the process as exceptionally fair and expressed the belief that board decisions are made based solely on the strength of the record. There are no quotas or affirmative action in today's military promotion system. Third, the military has limited but important tools with which to promote diversity without undermining merit-based decisions. The twin objectives of promoting on the basis of merit and developing a diverse and inclusive leadership may sound inconsistent, but they are not. One step the Department can take to build diversity without undermining merit is to ensure that the pipeline of individuals who enter into the merit-based promotion system is as diverse as possible. A second step the Department can take is to ensure that the boards that make the promotion decisions are themselves diverse. This is why Section 612 of Title 10 United States Code requires that members of a selection board represent the diverse population of the armed force to the concern to the extent practicable. It matters who makes the decisions. Taking these steps does not mean that the services are now acting on a basis other than merit or promoting less qualified officers. Rather, it is an indication that they are now able to recognize talent where they may not have been able to do so before. The result is a better and stronger force, and one that draws on all of the many strengths of our society. Thank you for inviting me to participate in today's hearing, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you to each of you for your opening statements. Each member will have 5 minutes to ask questions. I will begin with that time now. Mr. Tebow, some people have claimed that a large portion of potential recruits see the U.S. military as racist or sexist. So that's why DEI training is necessary to correct their perception and to boost recruitment. Do you agree with that assessment?
Mr. Chairman, I don't. I think if DEI training or recruitment based on race and sex is seen as the solution to perceived racism or sexism, that creates the boogeyman that the military seeks to eliminate with those programs. Instead, the military should maintain absolute objectivity and, frankly, almost indifference to those kinds of ideologies to maintain a fighting force that is competent. Not competent to consider all viewpoints, but competent to fight and win wars.
So you're saying it's a self-perpetuating narrative.
I think so.
Interesting. Mr. Greenway, what policy or other changes should be made to ensure that service members with the most talent and ability get promoted regardless of their race, gender, or other visible characteristics?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think one place to start is instructions to promotion and selection boards. For example, would you want the best qualified or a fully qualified physician attending you for medical care? I think the answer for most would be the best qualified, but current instructions allow, I think, for far too much latitude and discretion, gets to subjective care, and I think a lot of things can creep into the criteria. And so I would eliminate fully qualified, and I think we should look for the best qualified. And I think promotion boards are historically good at doing so.
Many have argued that the Army Combat Fitness Test, the ACFT, results in disparate outcomes for women and men. Can you address why the ACFT is a good test for combat skill and fitness regardless of how it impacts women in the Army? Mr. Greenway?
I think the first point goes to the rigors of the environment in which we must prepare our service members to perform in. And I think it's always been a struggle for myself and others to recognize why we have different standards. And if the environment is the same, if combat in fact has the same conditions expected to perform in, we should probably have the same standards for everyone who's going to participate in it. And so I think the degree to which we don't, we create all kinds of problems for ourselves, not least of which is inability to perform in combat.
Mr. Levine, in your opening statement, you mentioned that the promotion system was not as colorblind as it should be. What concrete changes can the services make to ensure promotion systems are more colorblind?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My point in the statement was that the promotion system cannot, in fact, be completely colorblind. Because even if we take photographs out of promotion files, we've still got names, we've still got histories, we've got still associations, things that are on somebody's resume that will indicate his historic background and including background of race. Very hard to mask gender, for example, if you can see the nominee's the candidate's name. On top of that, the main meat of a promotion board is the recommendations made by the officers' superiors, and those recommendations are not blind. They're made by somebody who knows exactly who he or she is recommending or not recommending. So as much as we would like it to be colorblind, it can't be colorblind, and we just have to recognize that as a fact.
Thank you. I'll yield back the rest of my time and yield to Mr. Kim for his 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks again to the three of you for coming on out here. And Mr. Levine, I wanted to just kind of drill in a little bit more on what you were just talking about here and just fleshing out some of your testimony as well. Just big picture, from what you see, is the process of military promotion as it is now, is it meritocratic? Is it based off of merit?
I believe that it is. I do not believe that it's quota-based. I've participated in reviews which have reviewed studies in which people have interviewed numerous members of selection boards, and the virtually unanimous view of people who participate in those boards is that they are merit-based, that they are making decisions purely on the basis of the file, and extraneous considerations do not come into play.
You just mentioned this idea about quotas, and it was raised as well in the opening, and I'm sure we talked about, but I guess I just wanted to kind of clarify this. What are we actually talking about here? You know, there's obviously could be aspirational goals or other things like that, but just when it comes to actual quotas dictating requirements of the services, does such a thing exist? Do those types of quotas exist in the current process?
I will tell you that it would be against current law, existing law. You don't need, you have a new statute that would also prohibit, but existing statute would prohibit having a quota saying that you have to have a certain percentage of nominations coming out based on race or gender or any other characteristic like that. So there are efforts to ensure, as I said, that the pipeline is diverse so that the people coming into the process start with a diverse group, but the decisions that are made with regard to whom to promote within that group are supposed to be made on the merits, and I believe that they are made on the merits.
Oh, I see what you're talking about. So the idea is that you know, the more that we can do our best to try to make sure that diversity is reflected very large in the broader force, but when it comes to the actual promotions, that there is no quota, that is done on that purely meritocratic approach. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. That is what I'm saying. Yes. Yes.
So just to kind of clarify, you know, we had in a previous hearing talk about affirmative action. Is any of that involved in the promotion process?
I do not believe that there is affirmative action as is generally defined involved in the promotion process. No.
The chairman cited a quote of yours that I thought was really interesting. Well, you said, I'll read it out. Military promotion system is merit-based, but that doesn't mean that we have been able to make it as colorblind or objective as we might like. And I just thought that was really interesting. What you just said back to the chairman kind of piqued my interest. I guess what I'm taking away from this, in terms of what you just said, is that in our minds, sometimes we are associating the idea of meritocracy with objectivity. that is what we should be achieving and striving for. But it sounded like what you were saying is that there's a limit to objectivity here, that there's always going to be some semblance of subjectivity, judgment, because we're talking about things that are not always quantitative and in that kind of way. Am I summing that up right?
Yes, we want our evaluators and we want our promotion boards to be as objective as they can possibly be. But at the end of the day, we're relying on human judgment, and human judgment on assessing characteristics like leadership, communication skills, ability to work with others, key characteristics that we expect our leaders to have in the military and that we look to promote. And different people with different experiences see those in different ways. You know, the person I might see as a potential leader might be somebody that I recognize from my own past, the people that I've dealt with, the people that I've worked with, the kinds of characteristics of leadership that I've seen in my career. Somebody else who has a different career and a different background might recognize other characteristics of leadership. So that's why I say that having a diverse group of people making those decisions is important, because you might recognize talent that you would not otherwise recognize just as a result of having the group of people who are making those decisions not be all out of the same rubber stamp and have the same set of views.
No, that's a really important point, and one that I've been really meditating on is just this understanding of just, you know, what does it mean to be a meritocracy? You know, what is it that we're going at? And I think that it's important for us to recognize that, you know, that there are limits to what, you know, just quantitative, objective approaches can do. In fact, if we do it solely based off of those things that we can measure in that kind of way, we'd be missing incredibly important characteristics that actually are there to help define and determine who is going to be the strongest leader. So thank you for your thoughts. I appreciate that, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. Your 5 minutes.
So, Mr. Tebow, is there anything that should dictate whether or not someone gets a job in the DoD other than who is most qualified?
No, Congressman.
Should,
For that specific job, no. Whoever can do the job, whatever job it is best, should get it.
should we consider whether or not the job's in a red state or a blue state?
No,
Should we consider a state's critical race theory perspectives?
no.
Should we consider a state's thoughts on gender ideology? Should we
No,
consider a thoughts on a state's abortion policy?
No, Congressman.
Mr. Greenway, can you think of anything other than the person's skill and their quality to align to the job that should be more important?
No, Congressman.
None of the things I mentioned?
None.
And why shouldn't a state's abortion policy influence what person gets what job in the military?
Because the military's unique responsibility is to perform in circumstances where no other part of our government can, or is expected to. And that environment is unforgiving, and so the standard has to be prerequisite. And in this case, I don't think we can afford to fail in the defense of our nation and its citizens because we compromise in that.
And is that the same for like a state's maybe gender policy? If you don't want the third grade teacher picking your kid's gender, that shouldn't really impact who gets what job in the military, should it?
No, absolutely not, Congressman.
Mr. Levine, do you share that perspective?
Absolutely. I absolutely do, Congressman. We have a very diverse military. It reflects the diversity of American society, and if we were to pick and choose based on the views of people who are in the military, it would be very destructive to the military.
And we shouldn't pick or choose based on the views of a state legislature either, should we?
I can't see why we would.
Yeah, I can't either. I'm glad to hear that universally presented. So, you know, Mr. Tebow, if someone were to say, look, first I look at who's most qualified, but then I also look at maybe what a state's abortion policies or gender policies are, what's the risk of melding those things into one analysis about what jobs people do in the military?
I think it creates, two sides to a coin that doesn't exist, Congressman. You can either make it about who is most qualified, not merely who is qualified, or you can make it about other factors that a person doesn't choose, like their race or sex, or like the state in which they may serve. And you can either admit that those latter factors don't matter and just choose who's most qualified anyways, or you can make compromises on who is truly the best person for each job based on other factors that have been deemed priorities from some spot in the chain of command. And I think that's what many of these diversity initiatives lead to.
And so as I understand that, you're presenting a binary paradigm either it's the one most qualified, and then we have a meritocracy, or it's the one most qualified plus anything else blended into that decision, you would say that is not a meritocracy.
I think it creates a slippery slope to where you are making a choice about something else. And I think you're right, Congressman.
Mr. Greenway, do you agree that it's that binary, that once you start bleeding into the decision-making process, these other factors and other things, you can say that you consider first the qualifications, but really, once it becomes muddled with something other than qualifications, the meritocracy train has kind of left the station?
Absolutely, and I'd give two examples of that. First is in the 70s, corporate policies started to influence the promotion process, and we suffered significantly. It took us about 6 or 8 years almost for the force to recover. And the second is in graduate degrees. It seems on the surface of it a good idea to have the professional qualification of a graduate degree. And thankfully, the pilot who ejected from the F-35 in South
Okay,
Carolina
got it.
survived. But
I got that. With my remaining minute, I'm going to play a video.
Transformational cultural change requires leadership from the top, and we do not have time to wait. Since January of this year, more than 400 anti-LGBTQ+ laws have been introduced at the state level. That number is rising and demonstrates a trend that could be dangerous for service members, their families, and the readiness of the force as a whole. When I look at potential candidates, say for squadron command, I strive to match the right person to the right job. I consider their job performance and relevant experience first. However, I also look at their personal circumstances, and their family is also an important factor. If a good match for a job does not feel safe being themselves and performing at their highest potential at a given location, or if their family could be denied critical health care due to the laws in that state, I am compelled to consider a different candidate and perhaps less qualified.
Yield back.
Mr. Walsh, your 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Does anyone disagree that our level of diversity in the military, at least according to race, exceeds that of the American public? We have more African Americans in the military than in the public. We have more Hispanics in the military than broadly in the population.
Congressman, that's generally true. It's not necessarily true if you look at all levels of
Right, so that's what we tend to hear is yes, 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 but. That quick but, though, touches all kinds of things we do in recruiting and enlistment, DEI training, but that's kind of brushed aside. But the General Officers Corps, does anyone disagree that at least across the services, most of our general officers are chosen from within, for example, in the Army, combat ranks or the combat MOSs, and for a whole variety of reasons, we tend to see more minorities in the service and the service support, usually because there's different skills or different preferences there. So, at least in my experience and what I've seen, is that the generals are chosen from combat arms, and they tend to tilt more towards men, and they tend to tilt more towards white men. Reasonable explanation, one would say, right?
That's generally accurate.
Okay, so then we start skewing that percentage. Mr. Levine, what then in our General Officer Corps, since it tends to be less diverse, is acceptable? Is it to match the population?
I don't believe that there is a percentage that's an acceptable percentage. I think that as we look at the type of factor that you just described, the reaction of the military has been a reasonable one, which is, why are we seeing minority officers go into support functions? Are there things we can do?
Support functions less important?
Not necessarily, but are there things that we can do in terms of mentorship or encouragement to persuade them that perhaps they should look at the combat arms functions as well, because if they're more, if they're, as you indicate, if they're more strongly represented in the lower grades in those in those functions, they're more likely to fleet up to the upper levels, and that is the kind of action that we take to encourage diversity.
So how do we then do that for females in general officers? Let's just stick with that, because there's all kinds of places we could go with that, but let's stick with that. How then do we do that? Do we encourage more females, particularly when physical fitness and the ability to perform to a certain standard is a key metric, let's say in Army combat arms, infantry, armor, what
You
have you.
don't necessarily have the full ability to do that with regard to women, and you have to defer to what, which
Would you
career fields
agree
are able
then
to
that
meet the
really
standards.
what it's about is about standards? And it should be, if we have a meritocracy, and we've had some definition of meritocracy, it's about standards, period. It's the standard needed to be an infantryman or woman. That may be a different, as it applies to physical, than it would be to, say, be a cyber warrior.
We have-
Different physicality needed to be in the infantry than a type on a keyboard.
Yes, Congressman, we have physical standards for specific MOSs, and those standards do not vary based on whether you're a woman or a man.
Actually, they do.
We have-
Actually, that's just blatantly incorrect. We have a dual standard. Myself and Tom Cotton have legislation to make them gender neutral and to make them according to the standard required.
Let me be clear. We have two different fitness standards. We have one fitness standard for an MOS. Those are two different things. The fitness standard is a general suitability to serve in the service, which you'll hear you can ask the professionals in the next panel, but they'll explain to you that's about your general standard of fitness.
Right,
There's
but
a separate standard, which is a standard for a combat arms MOS, and that does not vary. It does not vary based on gender.
But here's the issue with that. In order for promotion points and all kinds of other things, for example, you have a first female that goes through Ranger School, one standard, proud of her, absolutely earned it, but she goes to command an infantry platoon and she has a now different physical standard than the men and women that she's asked to lead. That's unfair to her, that undermines her achievement. And last I checked, the enemy's bullets don't make a distinction.
So again, she had to pass the same standard to get through Ranger School. She didn't get a different standard
Right.
through Ranger School. She had the same standard through Ranger School.
That's right, as it
She
should
has a
be.
different, she has a different fitness standard, which you'd think of as a health standard as a woman.
No.
because body weight is
No,
different.
it's
and things
called
like that.
it's deliberately called a combat fitness test. These are the standards you must hit for combat. The Army literally changed the name from physical fitness test, which is wellness and health, to a combat fitness test. And I think frankly, I'm going to move on, but you're making a distinction without a difference there. And at the end of the day, what I think we need to settle, and why this committee, under the chairman's leadership, is having so many hearings, it's about standards that we need to win and fight wars, not about all of these other factors factored in.
I agree with
Time
you,
is
Congressman.
expired.
That's
Mr. Mills, your 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, you went to Ranger School. You know all about the ideas of going to Darby phase and sitting up in Dahlonega, sitting in Florida phase. When you went through, based on your height, your size, or your physical strength, was your standards modified based on those things?
No, Congressman.
And do you feel that it would actually be something which is fair to modify Ranger School standards based on physical capability or capacity?
No, Congressman.
Mr. Levine, you just talked about, again, health and welfare. I've deployed multiple times, as has my colleague Mike Waltz and our chairman. And I can tell you that 180, 200-pound man with full kit, when he's shot and you're actually trying to pull him off the X, it doesn't matter your gender, it matters your capability, capacity, your combat fitness and readiness. So do you feel then that it should be based upon what your capability is or what your gender or other type of distinction is on whether or not you can perform those same duties?
So the performance in any MOS, in any assignment should be based on your capability for that assignment. And I agree with you, and I agree with Congressman Waltz that that should be absolutely standard-based. The question is whether the standard for fitness for participating in the armed services as a whole it should also be a single standard, or whether it is okay for that to be a dual standard. And my view is we have lots of jobs that are, as you described them, where you have to carry a 140-pound kit or 200-pound kit or whatever it is, and you better be able to carry it if you're going to carry it. We also have desk jobs. We also have jobs operating
But we have people who are actually having a different standard who
I
are in those combat arm.
I understand. So the question is, can we let somebody into the service based on a fitness standard that is a gender-based standard for admission into for accession into the service? It doesn't get you into a particular assignment, because for that assignment, you have to meet the physical criteria
Well,
for that
let me ask this
assignment.
question, because this is about meritocracy. This is about putting meritocracy over the ideas of DEI and all these other criterias. And in August of 2022, the memo from the Secretary of the Air Force detailed percentage goals based on race and gender, what any reasonable person would see as an absolute quota, but yet we try to say that we don't have a quota. Can you explain where these resources were redirected from in order to reach the race-based quotas set out by the Biden administration? Anyone?
So, Congressman, this is, where I see a disconnect between the supposed primacy of merit and the insistence that quotas don't exist. Because that memo you reference establishes percentage-based goals, not based on where people live or how, what their income level was growing up, but based on their skin color and their sex. And so, again, that goes back to this two-sided coin that I don't think exists. Either we can admit those goals are meaningless, and the Department of the Air Force and the subordinate units don't do anything to make sure they meet those goals for white men or black men, or we can acknowledge that those are quotas. I don't understand what the difference is other than the label we give that policy.
Mr. Gill, I absolutely agree with you, and I would argue the fact that most of this body actually believes in completely eliminating DEI, which is part of what's led to a deterioration, not just in the promotion of meritocracy, but also I think it's had a dire impact on our recruitment, and I think that we can acknowledge that we're at our lowest recruitment level since I believe it was 1973. And so my question to all three of you then would be, how do you see pronouns, and by the way, of course, we're the greatest when it comes to the battlefield. We can out-pronoun any of our enemies. We can out he, her, and she, him all day. But how does pronouns, quotas, and DEI strengthen or diminish our armed forces? And I'll start with you, Mr. Levine.
What I would say about pronouns is that if there's a fundamental part of our military culture and our military values, which is treating others with dignity and respect. And I believe that that fundamental principle should apply in the case of somebody who wants to have different pronouns used, which is don't disrespect them, don't intentionally insult them. Now, do I think that somebody should be directed to use a specific set of pronouns, whether they believe it or not? No, not particularly. But should we treat somebody with dignity and respect?
I don't think it's about dignity or respect. I think that it's absolutely the idea of trying to put ourselves into these individual sectors and boxes for division when the military is about cohesion, unification, not division. Mr. Greenway, same question, if you would.
I don't see any benefit, but ultimately these ideas lead exactly to that, to quotas that ultimately come at the expense of performance and merit. And when the Secretary of the Air Force promulgates written guidance, it's not seen as something that would be nice to achieve, at least unless the military's changed radically, and I don't think that it has. Promulgated written guidance means that that's exactly what you're supposed to do. And so aspirational though they may be, instructions issued to subordinate commands means they need to be followed.
I absolutely agree. My time's expired, but I thank you, gentlemen. And again, I hope our armed forces gets back to not serving political agendas, but serving our nation, and that we can actually identify that meritocracy is the most important thing. With that, I yield back.
I want to thank the first panel. This was a great, substantive, healthy discussion that will precede another panel, a discussion that we will have with some of our senior leaders in the military. So with that, we'll take a 3-minute recess, change panels. My hope is that we can get through the opening testimonies before members are called to vote, and then we'll come back and ask questions. Thank you. The hearing will now come to order. I would like to again welcome our witnesses. Each witness will have the opportunity to present his or her testimony, and each member will have an opportunity to question the witnesses for 5 minutes. We respectfully ask the witnesses to summarize their testimony in 2 minutes or less. Your written comments and statements will be made part of the hearing record. With that, Lieutenant General Stitt, you may make your opening statement.
Good afternoon, Chairman Banks, Ranking Member Kim, distinguished members of this committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you on behalf of the United States Army. The Army's mission is to deploy, fight, and win our nation's wars by providing ready, prompt, and sustained land dominance as part of the joint force. Accomplishing this mission requires placing the right soldier into the right assignment at the right time. This starts with recruiting across the United States, casting a wide net to ensure that all who want to serve and who meet our standards are afforded that opportunity. Programs such as the Future Soldier Preparatory Course provide our applicants the means to further develop themselves for a successful enlistment and completion of initial entry training. Our promotion system operates under the construct of statute and DoD policies, ensuring that we consider all eligible soldiers and select only the best for advancement. As a standards-based organization, promotion board members consider each soldier's file and select only those who are best qualified based upon merit. Our structural requirements determine how many of those best qualified soldiers on an order of merit list will advance for promotion to the next rank. For the Army's most impactful leadership positions, our officers and NCOs undergo an initial assessment. Leaders who compete for brigade and battalion command, as well as other select critical positions, attend the command assessment program, which ensures that we are selecting the right leaders who in turn have the greatest impact upon the soldiers in our formations. Our Army is ready because our accessions, selections, and promotions ensure that we are a force comprised of quality leaders and soldiers at all levels. Chairman Banks, Ranking Member Kim, members of this committee, I thank you for your generous and unwavering support to our talented soldiers, civilian professionals, and family members. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Admiral Cheeseman, you may make your opening statement.
Good afternoon, Chairman Banks, Ranking Member Kim, and distinguished members of this subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you to discuss meritocracy in the United States Navy. In everything we do, our primary objective remains taking care of our people in order to produce and preserve the best combat-ready naval forces in the world. To do that, our Navy will always maintain, train, and equip a combat-credible, dominant naval force to keep the sea lanes free and open, deter conflict, and when called upon, decisively win our nation's wars. Our entire Navy must leverage the best of our nation by investing in trained, resilient, and educated sailors that are self-assessing, self-correcting, and always learning toward one goal, delivering warfighting advantage. Our process for accessions, promotions, and command selections supports this by being solidly founded upon merit. The Navy has a deliberate process for recruiting candidates, advancing our sailors, and selecting our personnel for leadership positions, which is constantly reviewed to ensure the finest Americans are available for service at all ranks and all pay grades. These processes are rooted in law and sound policy. I look forward to working with you as we continue shaping our Navy to meet future challenges, and thank you for your unwavering support. I am ready to answer your questions.
Thank you. Dr. Strobel, you may make your opening statement.
Chairman Banks, Ranking Member Kim, and members of the subcommittee, your United States Marine Corps is a meritocracy. We take pride in our commitment to recognizing and rewarding excellence in a fair, transparent, and methodical way. Whether it is assessing, assigning, promoting, or awarding and retaining Marines, the Corps is dedicated to merit-based treatment of our warriors. Marines understand that their advancement and opportunities depend on their excellence, creating an environment where everyone has an equal opportunity for success. In our accessions, the Marine Corps' primary requirements are that an applicant wants to be a Marine, wants to defend our Constitution, and can meet our high standards of intellect, fitness, and character. We welcome individuals of any race, religion, color, gender identity, or sexual orientation from anywhere in our country who can meet these standards or wants to try. Everyone will be given a fair shot at the opportunity to become a Marine. Similarly, we assign, promote, and select for command based on merit. Our officer promotion selection boards are grounded in law. For all our boards, both statutory and non-statutory, we use a standardized briefing format and conduct anonymous voting. Our explicit standard is to always select the best and fully qualified. The success of the Marine Corps' meritocratic approach is reflected in Marine satisfaction. Marines demand fairness and accountability. Our historically high retention rates suggest that they believe the Corps treats them fairly, cares about their satisfaction, and values their careers. Marines choose to stay Marines because they have confidence that their careers will be determined by their excellence. This trust in our meritocratic principles is a driving force behind our sustained success. Thank you, and Semper Fidelis.
Thank you. Lieutenant General Miller, you may make your opening statement.
Good afternoon, Chairman Banks, Ranking Member Kim, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. I'm honored to have this opportunity to appear before you today to focus on the most significant competitive advantage the Air Force has over its adversaries, our airmen. Air Force talent management is focused on one simple principle: having the right airmen in the right job at the right time. To successfully achieve that principle, we rely on the strength of individual merits in all facets of our personnel system, from accessions to promotions to selection for command. This year, the active duty Air Force is projected to fall short of recruiting goals by 11%. This is due to factors such as low propensity to serve and a decline in the eligible population. To counter, we are increasing our direct engagement with citizens in areas of the country that are underrepresented in our service. To increase the eligible pool of applicants, we are modernizing our accessions policies to better align with the Department of Defense. Overall, our primary focus remains attracting and retaining individuals with superior abilities and talents. Meritocracy is the foundation of the Air Force promotion system. In accordance with law and DoD policy, promotion boards for commissioned officers recommend to the Secretary the best fully qualified officers based on a whole-person concept. Each officer's selection record is assessed on its own merit without regard to race, gender, or ethnicity, using factors that demonstrate exceptional job performance and leadership potential. Although non-statutory, command screening boards use the same review process for selecting senior officers for command. Within the enlisted ranks, airmen are promoted to non-commissioned officer based on their objective cumulative score within the weighted airman promotion system. Promotion to senior non-commissioned officer ranks follow a promotion board process similar to officers. 3- and 4-star general officer positions are nominatively filled, using a slate of highly qualified candidates produced by the GEO Future Assignment and Strategy tool. The tool objectively analyzes each position's requirements against qualifications of all general officers. To preserve our supremacy in today's world against our adversaries, the Air Force must ensure the airman is in the right job at the right time. Thank you for your continued advocacy for our airmen, both military and civilian, and their families.
Thank you. Ms. Kelly, you may make your opening statement.
Thank you. Chairman Banks, Ranking Member Kim, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the leadership and support you've provided to the United States Space Force. Your guardians, both military and civilian, are preserving freedom of action in an increasingly contested space domain. It's a privilege to come before you today. Developing a combat credible force ready for contested action in space is our imperative. To ensure that, we select the best, incorporating education, training, leadership, abilities, team building, and capabilities for past performance to generate the talent necessary to fight and win our nation's wars. We have also established in the Space Force values of character, connection, commitment, and courage. The Space Force promotion system is grounded in statute and Air Force policy. Our program fulfills the requirements of Section 619 of Title 10 U.S. Code and secretarial policy, focused on selecting and promoting the best qualified commissioned and non-commissioned officers to serve in positions of increased responsibility and increased authority. Promotion boards are charged with recommending the best qualified based on a whole person concept, which includes their record, their education, their performance, and demonstrated potential. We assign guardians to team roles and leadership positions based on the needs of the service and the qualifications for the job. As we continue to grow our foundation as the newest service, we are instituting policy and process to ensure we continue to attract the best our nation has to offer. Through partnerships with our sister services and the excellent support of the Air Force, we are pleased that today we are achieving our recruiting targets, our accessions goals, and our authorized end strength. Space is no longer a benign domain, and we know that. I'm proud of the more than 13,000 military and civilian guardians in the Space Force. Together, we're building a force unilaterally focused on securing our nations in, from, and to space. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you to each of you. I'll begin with questions, yield myself 5 minutes. I understand that boards are done based on U.S. code. However, this administration has made DEI front and center through executive order, and that affects the Department of Defense. And this question is for each of you. Lieutenant General Stitt, we'll begin with you. How do you balance requirements by the President for diversity with your duty to a talent-based system?
Chairman Banks, the Army does not utilize demographic goals or quotas in its promotion system, and every individual who is eligible for consideration is viewed by the merits of their file, which contains both their educational, their performance, and their assignment data that is available to all board members to review. Those board members review that. They vote on a 1 to 6, 1 being the worst, 6 being the best. Those votes are tabulated, and those that are best qualified are deemed and come forward for final advancement.
Vice Admiral.
Chairman, thank you very much for that question. Much like my Army counterpart, our process is based solely on the best and most fully qualified standard. That being said, we do recognize that the Navy is made up of many people with diverse backgrounds. It's important to understand that. Indeed, we do operate throughout the entire globe, so being able to operate with folks from all walks of life is pretty important to us. But that being said, the standard is the best and most fully qualified, and the process is exactly the same as my counterpart mentioned.
Doctor.
Thank you for the question. The Marine Corps' overarching objective is to be ready, most ready when the nation is least ready, and to be most lethal on the battlefield. In order to do that, we follow the imperative to select the best and most fully qualified candidates for promotion, for command, for assignments, and for accessions.
Lieutenant General.
Thank you. Yes, similar to my colleagues, we are a standard-based organization in the Air Force, and we are looking for the right person at the right time. And for promotion, we look at their career record and their performance, and we want to make sure that they are the best candidate for that position that is available.
Ms. Kelly.
Chairman, it's based on the best qualified, it's based on their past performance, it's based on how well we think they're ready to advance to that next level of performance inside the service. We take into account education, but basically we're picking the best and the brightest inside the Space Force.
So is it fair to say that all of you are ignoring the President's executive order? Can anyone respond to that?
Chairman, thanks for the question. I don't think we're ignoring any specific executive order. In the Navy, we do recognize diversity can be, a force for good as we're mining talent throughout the country and making sure we have the best and most fully qualified available. But that must be the standard. The standard is who is capable at performing at the next higher administrative milestone or for the statutory position they're being considered for, and that always will be the standard.
Under Chairman Banks, under current statute, we provide board members guidance on considering diversity in assignment, educational background, and experiences when reviewing all eligible candidates for promotion and that board member utilizes that in their own internal board voting philosophy and resulting in selection of best qualified once the votes are tabulated.
I think I'll leave it at that and yield to Ranking Member Kim for his 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I just wanted to kind of pick up and just kind of make sure I kind of got it on right, because over the course of the last panel, there's a lot of criticism saying that you all are doing something. You're saying, I'm guessing, the opposite of that. So I guess I just want to start here with Army and go down the line. Is the promotion process meritocratic and based solely off of capabilities? Army?
Ranking Member Kim, the promotion process is fair and based on the merits assessed by the board members to determine those who are best qualified for advancement to the next rank.
Chairman, I can confirm that it is exactly a meritocracy. Yes, sir.
Okay. Sir?
Yes, for the Marine Corps, the promotion selection boards are based on merit.
Air Force?
Yes, the promotion board is based on merit.
It's the same in the Space Force. Chairman.
No, if you don't mind, I'll go the reverse way. Just to kind of get this out on the table, is race or gender, sexuality, is that at all part of the consideration being judged for promotion?
It is not in the Space Force.
Air Force?
It is not in the Air Force.
Marine?
No.
Navy?
No, sir.
Army?
It is not, sir.
So thank you. Just wanted to kind of clear that up. I guess I just wanted to also kind of hone in. I'm not sure if you heard some of my questions in the first round, but I think sometimes on this committee I really do believe we're all trying to get to that place where we have the best leaders. I think a lot of us have that same goal in mind. I think there's difference of opinions on whether or not we're actually doing that. But it's often kind of used in this way of saying, look, we want an objective process, that we want to get rid of the subjectivity. But in the first panel, there was an interesting comment sort of saying that, look, when we're assessing leadership, that's not something that numbers alone are going to tell you. So I guess I just wanted to kind of go down one more time. Is that something that you would agree with, that there's still, that we try to be objective as much as we can, but there's going to be certain elements of this in terms of the qualities of leadership? So if you don't mind, just kind of, do you agree with that? And can you give me an example of some question of leadership that you feel like does require some judgment? Army?
Ranking Member Kim, utilizing the command assessment program that I spoke about in my opening statement, that's where we start to peel back and look at cognitive and non-cognitive abilities of those individuals before we place them into brigade, battalion command, or a senior non-commissioned officer billet in the brigade or battalion command level. We look at information from their peers and subordinates. These candidates participate in a double-blind panel before general officers who ask them a series of questions to determine their readiness and fitness for command.
Navy?
Congressman, similar answer from the Navy. We've developed pilot programs, Navy Leader Assessment Program, modeled off of the Army's lead, where we're doing exactly that on the front end of the selection process to really get at that character determination on the front end so we can mentor and train future naval officers to do the things we need them to do in positions of a higher authority. As mentioned in the first panel, character is hard to assess. Mm-hmm. And we do everything we can through our processes to ensure we have an accurate understanding of that before we place folks into positions of leadership.
Great. If you don't mind, I just want to pause since I'm kind of running a little low on time. I just want to get to one last question here to the Air Force. In a previous testimony, there was some talk about this August 2022 Air Force leadership memo detailing new diversity and inclusion goals for the Air Force officers. This was criticized as setting quotas. The memo talks about aspirations. I guess I just want to ask you to explain what impact this memo had on the promotion board processes since it was signed. What changed because of that memo? What changed at all in that process?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Actually, for the promotion process, absolutely nothing changed. I mean, we still are merit-based. We are looking for the whole person. That memo that the General Brown signed essentially was talking about goals for accessions. There was, we want to make sure that we have the best and brightest that we meet, that everybody across the United States has an opportunity to serve. And so he was just making sure that, that we did not
Just to be
eliminate
clear here, nothing changed in the process after that memo?
in the promotion process, nothing changed. That's
Okay,
correct.
thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Gates, 5 minutes.
So I guess I have the same question that I had for the last panel, and I'll start with you, General Miller. Should a state's gender policy affect who is aligned to what position in the military?
Absolutely not. It's
Should it-
the needs of the Air Force.
Yeah, so it shouldn't be the abortion policy either?
It's the needs of the Air Force and where the
Right, I'm just want to be really, I want to draw a fine point on it. The needs of the Air Force do
Yes.
not require the Air Force to consider a state's abortion policy or gender policy before assigning a service member to a position in that particular state.
We do not.
Okay, so what was that general on that video talking about when she said that there are 400 anti-LGBTQ laws that have to be considered before she aligns an applicant to a position?
Congressman, I cannot speak for General Burt and what she was talking about there.
You're both in the Air Force, right?
Sir, she's in the Space Force.
Oh, Space Force, maybe you can tell us, Ms. Kelly. What was she talking about?
Sir, my understanding of what her intent behind those comments is that she's really describing the assignments matching process in the Space Force.
Okay.
And that's what I believe she was describing.
Right, okay, so when I get that, that's pretty evident. But in that assignments matching process, should a state's abortion policy come into play?
So I don't want to speak for her, sir, but I will tell you.
I'm asking you.
And I
Should a
will,
state's abortion policy come into play?
what we take into account in the Space Force
Uh-huh.
is the needs of the service, the guardian themselves and whether they're qualified for the job.
Do you take into account a state's abortion policy?
We take into account the preference of the individual if they're interested in the particular job.
Okay, fascinating. I'm not asking about those things. I'm asking about whether or not you take into account a state's abortion policy.
We do not. 'Cause
Okay,
the needs
do you
of the
take into
service-
account a state's LGBTQ policy, whatever that is?
No, we do not, Congressman.
Okay, so why did your fellow space warrior with a bunch of stars on her, lapel stand up and give a speech that said when she's aligning someone to a particular job, she's evaluating these 400 anti-LGBTQ policies? Why did she say that?
Sir, I can't speak for why she said that.
Was that a mistake?
It certainly doesn't reflect what our processes are and what I know
All right,
them to
okay,
be.
so this is a moment here. This is a bit of a moment because we heard a senior person in the Space Force say one thing, and then you're here in front of a congressional committee saying that that is not what the Space Force believes. So I got to get to the bottom of this. So I sent a letter to General Burt saying, you've said that there are these 400 anti-LGBTQ policies that you are actively considering when aligning people to jobs. So I said, list them. Like, if there are 400 of them, I'd love to read them. And the answer that I got back from someone called Alex Wagner is that to answer your specific request, the Department of Air Force does not maintain a list of pending or enacted laws that impact military readiness. So does the Space Force have such a list?
No, we do not, Congressman.
We are policymakers that have to make decisions based on the representations of people who work at the Pentagon, right? And what you're providing us are conflicting and irreconcilable representations. And then when we ask follow-up questions so that we might be able to reconcile those things, the answer is we don't have a list. So as you're here today, can you just clear it up by denouncing those comments and saying that they are not the practice of what you all do?
Sir, I've described the practice that we do, and we do ask guardians for their preferences on duty assignment, and we try to match guardians.
Okay, so
we
if one of
can.
those preferences is someone saying, I don't like Florida's views on critical race theory, would you consider that and whether or not to send that person to Florida?
No, the
Okay,
guardian
so
would,
what if they said the abortion policy? Would you consider that?
sir, the guardian would have to prove that there is some sort of hardship to them, which I
But
would,
you don't accept as a de facto hardship that a 6-week abortion ban is a hardship, right?
that is not in our policy, no, sir.
I'm just trying to figure this out, Mr. Chairman. and I think we might have to do further investigative work to maybe get General Burt here to, it is unfair to ask you to characterize those comments, but at the end of the day, we have to figure out where to send the money and what authorities and restraints to put on that money. And if General Burt has gone rogue and engaged in some ultra-virus act to create a secret list of 400 policies that she deems discriminatory, I'd sure like the committee to see them. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Waltz.
Thank you. Just to build on that one more, I'm also, for one more minute, I'm also from Florida. So essentially what you're saying is you've described the policy today. Lieutenant General Burt violated that policy, or at least what she described as her efforts as a senior commander to reassign people based on a series of criteria. That's not in accordance with your policy, with the policy as you described it for the Space Force, correct?
Sir, I described our policies as
Was
you've heard.
her statements, as you heard today, in accordance with your policy?
Well, she said she's compelled to consider. She did not say that.
Even
she
if they're
has.
less qualified? It was her statement.
We have multiple guardians who are qualified for our position, sir.
So, and you mentioned preferences. Just to build on Representative Gates here, if perhaps their family feels unsafe because of a gun control policy and they don't feel like they can appropriately buy firearms to protect them, would you consider that?
Sir, there's an exception to the process, but
Yeah.
the guardian would have to prove that there's some sort of an undue hardship on them.
Right.
I would highly doubt that
I
that
think-
would meet the,
I would hope, because I think what we're trying to demonstrate here is we've opened statements from the senior leaders like that opens a Pandora's box of political issues put on the table, enacted by state elected officials that in our view should not be considered. I'm reassured to hear you say they should not be considered. But when you have 3-star generals saying not only should they be, she is doing it, do you see how that introduces doubt into our constituents and the American people that the senior leaders of the Space Force or the rest of the services are following the law?
Sir, I certainly see how that could be construed, yes.
Is she still in her position?
She is?
So there was no consequences for that statement, which is not in accordance with the policy that you've outlined.
Again, she did not make a statement publicly that she's actually reassigned anyone.
No, but she made a statement that she's considering it, and specifically state law in Florida, specified a state, specified a law that she is considering in furtherance of her command, and she's still in command.
I did not hear a specific state law specified.
Well, as it pertained, it was at a Pride event as it pertains to LGBTQ. That was specific.
She was speaking at a DOD event, sir.
Okay. I think the broader issue is we're hearing your testimony today, but when we have events like that, when we have a non-quota quota memo, goals, from the Secretary of the Air Force, when we have an orientation at the Air Force Academy, a slide that with a woman holding a picture saying, if you don't see my race, you don't see me, when it instructs cadets to not use the term colorblind, yet you're testifying that race isn't a factor, when the superintendent of the Air Force Academy tells me in a meeting that he finds the term colorblind offensive, then we have either some massive disconnects, or what my suspicion is you have an informal set of policies that may not be specifically in writing. You may not call it a quota, you may call it a goal, where these factors are being considered. General Stitt, you just testified that guidance is given in furtherance or during the promotion board of how to incorporate diversity. That may not be a directive per se, but guidance is often taken as such. So let me just ask you this in the time I have remaining. Does anyone on the board today have any data that you can provide the committee that shows that a more diverse or less diverse, let's take a submarine in the Navy, a crew, is more effective, is more ready?
Congressman, thanks for the question. We do not have any specific data right now that talks about any diversity, equity, inclusion efforts and how it relates to combat effectiveness.
Okay.
We do have an ongoing study at the Naval Postgraduate School that's reviewing inclusion and how it relates to the topics we're discussing, and we expect that study in the January 24 timeframe.
General Miller, we have the non-quota quota memo. Do you have any data that a squadron, a bomber crew, any unit in the Air Force is more or less ready based on the percentages of their racial diversity?
No, sir, not on the percentages, no, sir.
Does anyone have any data showing, I mean, I understand the narrative that, diversity of thought leads to a better unit, but do you have any data that shows that?
Gentleman's time has expired.
I didn't think so,
Or you could-
because it doesn't exist. Thank you, Mr.
Submit the-
Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Mills, quickly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just going to follow up on two things. One, I'm pretty sure that everyone's aware of Henry II, who had made the very popular, statement where he said, "Can no one rid me of this turbulent priest," or "No one rid me of this troublesome priest," which resulted in his knights going off and killing an archbishop. I bring that up because, as my colleague Mr. Waltz just pointed out, General Stitt, things like we're providing guidance could very much be perceived as an actual directive, and so that's something that we might want to be very cautious of, because that does lead, when you have as many stars as you do, sir, and being a non-commissioned officer as I was, as a directive more than it is just a basis of guidance. I'd also like to go back to General Burke, because I'm curious still on why there was no actual counseling, disciplinary actions, or at least something that had led to the statement of, you may need to be cautious with what you're saying because it's against our actual policies and how we run things. Why was nothing done after that statement?
Sir, it's quite possible that conversation like what you just described did happen.
On record, and it's in her file?
I'm not aware of it.
Okay. And General Miller, in August of 2022, the Secretary of the Air Force set the new race and gender goals for the Air Force's commissioned officer applicant pools, which we heard about earlier in my testimony. Can you please describe the steps and how you've taken to meet those goals?
These are accession goals. Are you talking about the memo from the Chief of Staff, right? They're accession goals, and there's, they're just aspirations to make sure that we reach everybody across the United States. And
can everyone, and I'll let you individually go, and I'll talk with you first, General Stitt, how does redirecting resources away from critical needs and towards DEI initiatives deter adversaries like China?
I believe that our force today is ready, sir, to answer the nation's call and take on a peer or near-peer adversary around the globe.
Sir, I appreciate that. I'm going to go back and ask for a more defined answer than just that. How does redirecting resources away from critical needs towards DEI initiatives help prepare us for China?
Representative Mills, in order to give you a more detailed answer, may I take that question for the record, please?
Please do. Vice Admiral?
Congressman, thanks for the question. The Navy is focused on making it a place where all Americans can see themselves succeeding. To do that, we want to be an inclusive environment. We want to make sure that every American who can meet the standard has a place in the Navy, because we know the people are the ones that will fight and win our nation's wars. So that's what we're focused on.
You're talking about inclusiveness as if that didn't exist. So I guess when I was in the military, then it didn't exist back then, and we had to frame an entire funding pool towards DEI to ensure inclusiveness that didn't exist previously?
Congressman, I'm not saying that at all. I'm certain it did exist. I've enjoyed that for 34 years in my service.
Exactly my point.
It absolutely is. My point is that we have areas of the country where we are underserved, where our word has not gotten out, and we need to mine talent from every possible zip code to get the mission done.
Thank you very much. And to the Marine Corps, look, I almost don't even need to ask the question. Raw Marines, you guys are the ones who are actually getting to your recruitment goals and continuing to maintain. So I'll let you comment on it, but we know what you guys are doing.
Thank you, Representative. The Marine Corps is interested in being inclusive and exploiting the talents of all Americans who are willing and qualified to serve. And that focus on inclusivity, I think, has contributed to our historic high retention rates over the last 2 years, which will directly help us in any conflict with any adversary in the future.
So you feel that additional resources was necessary for that?
I don't know that they were additional. I think we already were resourcing.
Well, I can tell you by the line items, it was definitely additional funding.
Mr. Mills, in the interest of time, we will never make it to votes. if we don't leave
All right.
now. So I want to thank all of the panelists. I'm going to save my closing statement. A very important conversation today. Thank you for joining us once again. Thank you for your service. The hearing is over.